Winter 2003, Blackwell County. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a snowstorm hit so hard that night the roads vanished before midnight. Power lines collapsed, phone signals disappeared, the entire county went dark, and inside St. Mercy Church, 37 people gathered for a funeral. By sunrise, 31 of them were dead. Police reports blamed hypothermia, mass panic, trauma, but the six survivors all told the investigators same story. At some point during the night, the dead man inside the coffin opened his eyes and he wasn't alone. Walter Grady was a coal miner, 48-year-old, married, two daughters. People trusted Walter. He had spent 20 years underground beside the same man, now carrying his coffin through the church doors. 3 days earlier, a tunnel collapse buried him beneath several tons of rock. The body recovered from the mine was sealed immediately. No viewing, no goodbye, no even his wife was allowed to see him. That should have frightened people more than it did. But funerals in mountain towns are different. People don't question death there. They sit quietly, they grieve, they survive it, at least they try to do. Around 2:17 in the morning, people inside church noticed a smell. No decay, no smoke, wet soil, cold earth, like rain falling onto an old graveyard. Children covered their noses. Adults looked around, pretending not to notice it. Then someone whispered near the front pew, "The coffin. It was closed before." Every head in the church turned slowly. The lid had shifted open slightly, just a few inches. Nobody wanted to touch it. An old woman standing closest to the casket suddenly stepped backward. Her face had gone completely pale. Then she screamed, no loudly, words like someone trying not to scream and failing. She kept pointing inside the coffin, saying the same sentence over and over. His hands moved. Nobody believed her because grief makes people imagine things. Then the lights went out, not flickering, not dimming, gone. Every candle, every bulb, the entire church disappeared into complete darkness. The only thing 37 people could hear was breathing, heavy breathing, close, wet, and for 7 seconds, coming from inside the coffin. When the emergency lights finally returned, three things had changed. The coffin was fully open, mud covered the floor around it, and Walter Grady's body was gone. When police interviewed the survivors, most of them said the missing body wasn't the part that truly broke them. It was the footprints, fresh footprints in black mud leading away from the coffin, not toward the church doors, toward the people still inside. The storm reached Blackwell before sunset. By 9 o'clock, snow had buried most of the roads leading into town. Police cruisers stopped responding. Electricity failed county-wide. Even the church generator died sometime during a funeral service. Nobody could leave, and slowly, the people trapped inside St. Mercy Church began understanding something terrifying. They would be spending the night there. Evelyn Harper stood near the black pew, trying not to look at Walter's coffin. She hated funerals ever since her younger sister Lily died years earlier. Churches made her feel physically sick. The smell of candles, old wood, the flowers, grief clung the place like sad mercy. You could feel in the walls. Her mother sat beside her, holding a tissue tightly against trembling lips. You should have stayed in Chicago, she whispered. You asked me to come. I know. Something about her mother's voice felt wrong. No sadness, no exhaustion, guilt, like she regretted bringing Evelyn there. Before Evelyn could ask what she meant, Father Banner approached the altar. The old priest looked exhausted, pale skin stretched tightly across his face, red eyes, shaking hands. But it wasn't the age making him tremble. Evelyn noticed something disturbing almost immediately. The priest kept staring at the coffin, not the mourners, not the Bible in his hands, the coffin, the entire time, like he expected something inside to move. By midnight, the church no longer felt safe. People stopped talking. The storm outside hammered the stained glass window hard enough to rattle the frames. Children slept against their parents, candles burned low, shadows moving strangely across the walls, and in the center of the room, Walter Grady's sealed black coffin sat beneath flickering candlelight, silent, waiting. Then Walter's youngest daughter quietly lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and asked, why Daddy's coffin sound wet? Every adult froze instantly. Nobody answered her because in that silence everyone heard it too, draping, slow, uneven, coming from inside the coffin. Drip, drip, slow, uneven, like water falling somewhere deep underground. Nobody moved, nobody even whispered anymore. The entire church sat frozen around that sound. Walter's daughter buried her face into her mother's chest and whispered softly, Mom, is Daddy's awake? Her mother pulled the little girl close immediately. Don't say that. The fear in her voice made it worse because she sounded like someone trying to convince herself. Father Banner slowly picked up a candle from the altar. Its flame shook violently in his hand as he stepped toward the coffin. His shoes echoed softly against the wooden floorboards. Nobody offered to follow him. Nobody wanted to get closer. Evelyn noticed something strange then. The priest wasn't holding his Bible anymore. He was whispering something under his breath. Not prayers, apologies. The dripping sound suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the church. Father Banner reached the coffin slowly and placed one trembling hand against the lid. Then he froze. His entire body locked still. Evelyn saw the color leave his face instantly. Someone near the back whispered, Father. He didn't answer. Slowly, he turned his hand toward the candlelight. Fresh black mud covered his fingers, cold, wet, thick, like soil pulled from deep underground. Walter had been dead from only 3 days. That coffin had never touched the dirt. At least that's what everyone believed. Father Bennett turned toward the mourners. His expressions looked hollow, like a man realizing something he had spent years trying to deny. Then he spoke very quietly. Nobody comes near this coffin. No one argued, not because they trusted him, because fear had already entered the room. Real fear, the kind people feel before disasters happen. Then, loud thud. The The sound exploded from inside the coffin. Several people screamed instantly. Another third, hit harder this time. Not random movement, not wood settling, knuckles, something knocking from inside the casket. Walter's daughter started crying. Daddy scared me. Connor had worked beside Walter in the mines for over a decade. Big man, practical man, the kind of person who didn't believe in ghost stories. He grabbed a metal fireplace poker from beside the wall and stepped forward angrily. This is insane. Father Banner moved directly in front of him. Don't open it, don't. Don't open it, don't do it. Connor shoved him aside immediately. Move, Connor, move. The priest's face broke completely then, not with anger, terror, pure terror. Please don't do it. Don't let him out. Connor ignored him. He grabbed the coffin lid tightly with both hands and pulled it open. The smell hit first. Wet earth, rotting water, and beneath both of those, blood. Most of people gagged immediately. Walter's body still lay inside the coffin, but something about him felt wrong, horribly wrong. His skin looked swollen, grey, almost soft, like something left underwater too long. His funeral suit had ripped around the fingerprints, and under the candlelight, everyone could finally see Walter's hands. His fingernails were packed with fresh black dirt, as if he had been digging inside the coffin with his bare hands. Connor stared down at the body, breathing heavily, then forced a nervous laugh. See? Nothing. Nobody answered. See? He is still dead. Relief moved weakly through parts of the church. People exhaled shakily. Some even cried to embarrassment. Maybe fear had gotten into their heads. Maybe grief and darkness had broken everyone for a moment. It had to be that. The Walter's eyes opened slowly, not suddenly, like someone walking from deep sleep. Wet eyes staring upward toward the ceiling, unblinking, empty. Walter's wife made a sound no human being should ever make. A scream so full of terror it barely sounded real. Connor stumbled backward hard enough to knock our view. Walker's mouth slowly began opening, wider and wider. Bones cracked softly inside his jaw. Then, from somewhere deep inside his chest, came a sound. Wet, rattling, like something learning how to breathe again. Chaos exploded instantly. People ran, candles crashed to the floor, children screamed. Walter suddenly sat upright inside the coffin. Mud poured from his mouth in thick black streams. But he wasn't reacting to the panic around him. He stayed perfectly still, slowly turning his head from face to face across the church, watching people carefully like he was searching for someone. Then his eyes stopped moving and locked onto Father Banner. The old priest collapsed to his knees immediately, and for the first time that night, he started crying, real crying, broken crying. Walter stared at him silently for several seconds. Then he spoke. His voice sounded thick with mud and water, barely human. You left us there. Nobody moved after Walter spoke, not because they didn't want to, because fear had completely taken control of the room. You left us there. The words still hung in the air like smoke. Walter stood beside the coffin, dripping mud onto the church floor, his dead eyes locked on Father Banner, waiting. The old priest collapsed against the altar, trembling violently. People looked at him now instead of Walter, because suddenly they understood something horrifying. The priest knew exactly what this was. Evelyn pushed through the terrified crowd and grabbed Father Banners by the shoulders. What does he mean? The priest didn't answer. Father, her voice cracked now. What happened in that mine? Still nothing. Only tears running down the old man's face. Then suddenly, Evelyn's mother spoke from behind her, quietly, like someone finally too exhausted to keep lying. There were survivors. Several people turned toward her instantly. Walter's wife closed her eyes like she already knew the truth was finally coming. Evelyn stared at her mother in disbelief. What? Her mother's hand trembled in her lap. The collapse didn't kill them immediately. Nobody inside the church made a sound. Outside, the storm hammered against the window harder than ever, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth finally came out. 3 days earlier, part of Blackwell mine collapsed during a night shift. Walter and two other miners were trapped underground in a lower shaft. At first, everyone believed rescue crew would reach them quickly, and for 2 days, workers above ground heard them alive beneath the rock, tapping on pipes, calling for help, praying, and the entire county knew. Families waiting outside the mine entrance day and night, hoping to hear news. But the company running the mine came out with different conclusion. They told digging deeper will risk to another collapse, too expensive and too dangerous. So the board voted to seal the shaft permanently, with the man still alive inside. Evelyn slowly turned toward Father Banner. The priest covered his face, crying, You signed it? Her voice barely came out. The old man nodded weakly. I told the families it was God's will. Several people in the church looked physically sick now. Walter's wife began sobbing openly. You said they died instantly. Father Banner shook harder. I know. You lied to us. I know. His scream echoed violently through the church. The silence returned again. Heavy silence. Walter still hadn't moved. That somehow made everything worse. He simply stood there watching, mud dripping from his fingertips. Then slowly he tilted his head toward Father Banner. Bones cracked softly inside his neck. You heard us praying. The priest completely broke then, crying openly now. We could not reach you. Walter took one slow step forward. The lights inside the church flickered violently. You heard us. His voice no longer sounded human. It sounded layered, like multiple people speaking through the same thread. And underneath Walter's voice, people could hear something else. Other voices, weak, crying, desperate, still trapped underground. Then came the scratching, soft at first, underneath the search floor. Everyone froze immediately. Scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging slow beneath the wood. Children started screaming again. Then the scratching spread across the entire church now. Under the pews, under the altar, beneath everyone's feet. Then loud crack. Part of the floor collapsed near the front aisle. A woman fell screaming as black dirt exploded upward from the beneath the church. Rotten hands brushed through the broken floorboards. Human hands covered in coal dust. People ran instantly. Pews overturned, candles sheltered, more cracks split across the church floor. And from the darkness beneath St. Mercy's Church, more bodies began pulling themselves. Miners, or what used to be miners, skin hanging loose from bone, mining helmets fused into rotten flesh, dead flashlight beams glowing faintly in the darkness below. Walter's wife collapsed, crying, "Oh God!" One of the miners slowly lifted his head toward the crowd. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, and dirt poured out instead of words. Panic consumed the church completely now. People going fast toward the church doors, trying to escape. Connor ripped the barricade aside and threw the entrance open. But the second the doors opened, everyone stopped moving. There was nothing outside anymore. No road, no snow, no town, only darkness. Endless blackness, swallowing everything beyond the church steps. Cold air drifting inward, carrying the smell of wet earth. One terrified man rushed outside anyway. The darkness swallowed him instantly. No scream, no footsteps, nothing. Like he had been erased. Connor slammed the church doors shut again, his hands shaking violently now, and for the first time in all night, the strongest man in the room finally whispered, "We are trapped." Walter slowly turned toward the terrified crowd, then towards the manor, crawling from the beneath the church, and finally back to Father Banner. The priest looked eerily older now, broken, destroyed. Walter's dead eyes never blinked. Then quietly, almost sadly, he spoke again. "We were still alive when the air ran out." By 3 in the morning, St. Mercy's Church no longer sounded human. The building groaned constantly around them. Wood splitting, people crying, something moved beneath the floor, and mixed into all of it the sound of miners still digging. Even thought they had been dead. The survivors gathered near the altar, trying to stay away from the broken floorboards. 37 people had entered the church earlier that night. No, barely a dozen remained alive. Some were injured, some were praying, some had completely stopped speaking. Some had lost their mind. Shock had hollowed them out. Evelyn sat beside her mother, holding Walter's terrified daughters close against her chest. The little girls had not cried in several minutes. That scared Evelyn more than the screaming. Children usually stop crying when fear becomes too large for their minds to process. Across the church, Father Banner remained on his knees, broken. The old priest stared at Walter with tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry." Walter didn't answer, mud still dripping slowly from his clothes onto church floor. Around him, the dead miners stood silently in the candlelight, watching, waiting. Then one of the miners stepped forward. Half his face was crushed inward from the collapse. Cold dust filled the empty space where his eyes should have been. But when he spoke, his voice sounded painfully human. We called for our wives. Another miner whispered. We could hear the rescue crews above us. Another, we heard them stop drilling. Walter finally looked toward the survivors gathered near the altar, and for the first time that night, Evelyn saw something worse than anger on his face. Grief, real grief, the kind that never ends. Father Bennett slowly stood, his legs barely worked anymore. The old priest looked toward the terrified people still alive inside the church, then toward the dead miners surrounding him, and finally toward the large wooden cross hanging above the altar. I condemn you, he whispered. Walter said nothing. Father Banner wiped tears from his face with shaking hands. Then he looked directly at Evelyn. There is only one way this ends. Evelyn felt cold move through her chest. What do you mean? The priest stared toward the darkness beneath the broken church floor. They were buried without truth. And dead don't stay quiet when truth is buried with them. Slowly, Father Banner walked toward Walter. Nobody tried stopping him. The priest's breathing shook violently with every step. When he finally stood directly in front of Walter, he whispered, I hear you now. Walter stared into his eyes. Then Father Bennett turned toward the survivors one last time and confessed everything: the lies, the signatures, the money the church accepted from the mining company to silence the family, every terrible thing, every cowardly thing. He spoke until the entire church echoed with weeping. Then Father Banner did something nobody expected. He opened the church doors himself. Darkness waited outside, endless, cold, breathing. The father looked toward it without fear now, because some people stop fearing death the moment guilt becomes heavier. Then he turned back toward Walter. I left you underground, so I will go where you were sent. And before anyone could stop him, Father Banner stepped into the darkness. The blackness swallowed him instantly. Gone, no scream, no sound, nothing. Then something changed. The church became quiet, completely quiet. The scratching beneath the floor stopped. The dead miners slowly lowered their heads, and for the first time in all the night, Walter looked tired instead of angry. Snow began falling outside again, real snow. The darkness beyond the church doors disappeared. Roads returned, trees returned, the world returned. Morning had finally came, and one by one, the dead miners began sinking slowly back into the broken earth beneath the church floor. No violently, peacefully, like exhausted men finally allowed to rest. Walter remained standing near the altar longer than the others. His wife stepped toward him trembling. Tears streamed down her face. For a moment, Walter almost looked like a human again, not a monster, just a husband who never made it home. Then his youngest daughter whispered softly, Daddy. Walter looked at her, and slowly, very slowly, he nodded. That broke everyone, because underneath all the horror, all the death, all the terror, he had still been a father. As sunlight finally pushed through the stained glass window, Walter's body began collapsing slowly into black dust. The little girls cried into their mother's arm, and before the last part of him disappeared, Walter looked once more toward Evelyn, then toward the church floor beneath them, almost like a warning. Don't bury the truth again. Then he was gone. Police reached St. Mercy's Church shortly after sunrise. 6 survivors were found inside, half frozen, covered in mud, barely able to speak. Official reports blamed the storm, mass hysteria, structural collapse. That was easier for people to believe. The mine company denied everything. Most records disappeared within weeks. And then Blackwell County tried forgetting the entire night ever happened. But some places never fully let go of what happened inside them. St. Mercy Church was demolished then. Workers refused to continue construction after several bodies were discovered, buried beneath the foundation, all wearing mining helmets, all reaching upward. And even now, people driving through Blackwell during heavy snow sometimes report hearing something strange beneath the road, faint knocking deep underground, like someone still trying to get out. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. And for the voice, I will improve my voice time by time. Sorry for interruptions. Thank you. Support the channel. Welcome.